you need to. So appreciate everyone's patience. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Dustin Sachs. I am the Director of Research and Content Strategy for ICIT, and I want to welcome you to today's ICIT briefing entitled OT Risk Alert: Why CISOs in Every Sector Should Prioritize OT Security. We want to extend a special welcome to our ICIT members and thank them for their support. And I want to thank Claroty, who is a corporate member of ICIT, for partnering with us on today's briefing as our technology expert. As a nonprofit, nonpartisan think tank, partners like Claroty are crucial to keeping our briefings freely available, and we are grateful for their support. So today's session is going to be focused on OT security and talking about the interesting scenario where most organizations don't focus as well on OT security as they should. We're going to talk about what OT security, what we mean when we're talking OT security, as well as also what we can do and the information that we can provide to individuals and to CISOs to help you be empowered when you go to speak to other stakeholders in the organization. I'm excited to introduce our esteemed panel of experts who are going to share their perspective on today's topic. We'll go around and allow each of them to introduce themselves. First, we've got Daryl Haegley, who is Technical Director, DAF Control Systems, Cyber Resiliency at the Pentagon, working for the U.S. Department of Defense. Jerry Davis, who's a member of the Cyber Safety Review Board for DHS, as well as the former CIO for NASA Ames Research Center and current CISO at PG&E. Ed Harris, who is CISO of Mouser Packaging and is also an ICIT fellow, as well as Jerry and Daryl. And finally, Jeff Kreitzer, who is DoD Federal Civilian Director for Claroty. So I'll give each of you a moment to go around and add any other information you'd like for the attendees to know about you. We'll start with Daryl. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Daryl's the one.
Yes, I apologize. Jerry, sorry, moving to Jerry.
Hey, no problem. Thanks. It's a pleasure, everyone. As stated, I'm Jerry Davis. One of the things I probably should note is that I'm not the CISO for PG&E. I haven't updated my LinkedIn in some time, but I was a chief security officer there, ran cybersecurity for the Northern California and pretty much Central California electrical grid and gas grid as well. Former CIO NASA Ames. I was also the CISO for global CISO for NASA in the late 2007 through 2010 timeframe. And as mentioned, I'm currently a board member appointed to the Cyber Safety Review Board under CISA at DHS. Looking forward to this conversation with the panelists here and with the audience. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ed.
Ed Harris, I'm the CISO for Mouser Packaging Solutions. We are the largest rigid packaging manufacturer in the world. Headquarters in Chicago. We sit across 5 different continents and in 180 different countries. I've been in this line of work for 32 years this year. In my spare time, I decided to take on the gig of going to get my doctorate. I'm about 4 months out from completing that, and became a research fellow with ICIT about a year ago.
Awesome, thank you, and I definitely appreciate the doctoral journey being only a couple months behind you on that. So, yeah, it's great. Great.
I've done a lot of stupid things in my life, you know, and this I would love to say this is one of them. Once I'm done, I'll feel much better about myself. But man, this has absolutely been a journey.
It has. It is for sure. And Jeff.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you, I'm the only one without the doctoral path here. So anyway, I'm not going down that road. But hey, pleasure to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So Jeff Kreitzer, I am a former naval aviator. Have had a lot of practitioner experience in the Navy from the signals intelligence side. Been in cyber for quite some time, several decades now. But now working at Claroty as the DoD Federal Civilian Director. And Claroty has been involved in the OT ICS space for quite some time. So hopefully we can glean some good information in this conversation in the panel. And again, thank you, Dustin, for the invitation. A pleasure to be part of this today.
Absolutely. Thank you to Claroty again for sponsoring this. So let's jump in. I think it would be good to start off to give each of you an opportunity to share what is your definition of operational technology OT when we're talking about things, because I think it's important for everybody to understand the breadth and depth of what makes up OT and why it touches literally every industry out there. So let's start, Jerry, with you. How do you define OT?
Oh, Jerry, you're muted.
Jerry, you're muted, I think.
I knew that. I would say that it is a very specialized set of networked technology used to operate and manage physical processes and controls in a number of different industries and environments.
Awesome. Ed, your thoughts?
Yeah, so I'm gonna go with the Cisco definition that they have on their website. It's hardware and software that monitors and controls devices, processes, and infrastructure in an industrial setting. Specific, not to say manufacturing only, but an industrial setting, which can include energy and water and those areas.
So, Jeff, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, no, I would agree with Jerry and Ed on the definitions for sure. But I think that, and this is really where the crux of this webinar can get very interesting, is that we look at operational technology. I think that the OT space, in the classical definition, is what people think of. However, there are so many convergence happening within the space, right, where you get IT worked its way in here. So this very stovepiped definition of what OT is, I think it's starting to break down, and we're looking at things that are going to be more IT based in terms of integrated technologies and convergence in this space, which I think and both adds, as we get down into the session, more into what benefit can that provide, and also what risk can it provide, right? So what risk gets introduced in this space. So it's an interesting spot to be in. I will say one thing to be very clear. We tend to look at the medical side of this IOMT to be distinctly different, right? Because the risk and the profile are different. I don't normally include that as part of OT. Sometimes it gets lumped in, but to Ed's point, it's more in the industrial setting, manufacturing, distribution, producing things, distributing things of an industrial nature, whether it be electricity, manufactured goods, et cetera. That seems to be the distinction between OT and IOMT, which would be, of course, infusion pumps, heart rate monitors, et cetera.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome, thank you. So, it was interesting in kind of in prepping for this. One of the things that I certainly looked at was some of the material that comes out of CISO, and I was looking at the cross-sector cybersecurity performance goals, and there was some really interesting statements made related to OT, and I'm going to read this for the benefit of everyone. OT security often remains overlooked and under-resourced. The cybersecurity industry is still largely focused on business IT systems, often neglecting the critical risk in OT systems, which were designed to optimize reliability and availability, and often lack native security capabilities. This puts critical infrastructure entities at serious risk as more OT devices become network connected. Even so, many critical infrastructure entities lack adequate OT cybersecurity programs, especially where cybersecurity is still seen as primarily an IT concern, entities that do not have OT cybersecurity programs often lack basic OT cyber protections and are unable to find relevant OT specific guidance for their environments. So I think the first question that I've gotten, I'm going to start with Jerry. What practical steps can CISOs take to filter out the noise of the doomsday predictions and focus on implementing sound cyber considerations when they're securing OT networks?
That's an interesting question, and and I would start with making it pretty simple. And in my experience in working largely, primarily in the IT space and securing IT networks, and then at some point in my career moving into environments that had a lot of OT technology. One of the things that I found in working with my peers in different areas is that simply CISOs need to, one of the things that they can do first is get educated about OT. What I find is that in the general world today is that CISOs just really don't have the correct depth of knowledge about OT environments in themselves. They're the technologies, how they're managed, how they're set up in the environment are very different from IT. And as we kind of grew up, most of us grew up in the IT world. I think a lot of times we believe that we can just sort of take what we've learned in IT and securing IT networks and translate that over to OT, and it's not going to work. It doesn't work that way. So I would say number one is to get smart, get educated about OT. And I think it's part of getting the second piece of that would be is understanding that in particular environments, particularly like in very heavily industrial environments or utility and energy environments where I've worked in before, is that when you understand OT, you have to understand that it is an engineering discipline, and that one of the ways that you can ensure that cyber considerations are sound is by bringing in and develop a relationship and a knowledge sharing relationship of what you know about cyber with the individuals out in the field who are managing OT environments, those engineers, because they generally will lack the cyber aspects of things in OT. So I think number one, getting smart in OT as a CISO, and number two, bringing in the experts on the engineering side in those, again, particular industrial environments, melding in and sharing information from the cyber side into engineering and vice versa. I think that will go a long way for everybody understanding OT and security considerations and then bringing down that noise level.
Oh, those are great points. Ed, any thoughts from you? Practical steps CISOs can take?
Yeah, I think probably one of the biggest things, and Jerry's alluded to this already, is OT are not traditional computing assets. They're specialized pieces of equipment, and they require specialized care, and we have specialized people who work on them. We call them our facilities engineers, and they're not your traditional IT person. They're not a traditional cyber person. They're engineering staff who focus on the engineering aspects of the industrial side of the house. And so a failure to abide by recognizing that these are special pieces of equipment can result in the OT becoming unmanageable or even unusable. And what does that affect? A revenue stream. And you only get to make that resume generating event once in a company before you have to go find a job someplace else. And so, yeah, when you understand that it is a very specialized piece of equipment that you can't throw normal IT resources at, you can't scan it for vulnerabilities like you would normally. You can't just patch it like you would normally. There are special requirements around OT, and engineers are very well adept at that. They become an extension of the information security and IT teams. We see the notifications that come out around from CISA specifically around OT vulnerabilities that exist in particular devices. And one of the things that makes a difference for us is we catalog what our OT is and where it's located. And so when I get a vulnerability in, we can go back into our CMDB, find out where this particular device is located. I might not have it anywhere in the company, but I might also have it in 120 out of 180 facilities worldwide. And so I know who my building engineers are. I bring them up to speed on the cyber risk associated with the technology that they're responsible for, and they work with the industry manufacturers. They get the updates, and they apply the updates, and they work lockstep with IT and InfoSec, and they're pretty proud of that process, because number one, we bring, as information security professionals, we bring to the table the knowledge that these vulnerabilities exist, because engineers typically don't get that level of information. They don't understand the risks to the business. They just understand when their equipment's not working. And so by partnering with the engineering staff who are responsible for the care and feeding of this OT, it really creates a really unique synergy, in that we can address vulnerabilities and mitigate risk in a very timely manner. Whereas before, I'm like, I'm the patching guy. I've got to go patch what? I've got to patch a machine that filters water or makes boxes or cuts steel. And it's like, well, what if I take that down? What if you take down the revenue stream of your organization because of a bad patch? And so understanding that these are not your traditional run-of-the-mill computing assets. They're very specialized and require a special level of attention, but it is manageable and it can be achieved.
Awesome, thank you. Jeff, from your experience, from dealing with all the customers that Claroty deals with, what have you seen as some of the kind of key takeaways?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think that some of the takeaways I've seen really is it's not a tool issue, it's not a platform issue. I think that there's a lot of availability in the industry to support OT and IT and a converged environment as well. It really is in the practical implementations of these things, and I think that you also have to understand, what the CISOs who deal with OT have to face from a risks perspective. I think Ed and Jerry hit these points appropriately. When you look at it from a pure IT standpoint, financial risk, yes. I mean, there may be theft of intellectual property, and if there's customer information stored, there may be those kind of risk profiles, maybe ransomware shutting down IT systems. But in the case of OT, especially if it's critical infrastructure, I mean, that impact is wide-reaching and far more devastating. So I don't know if taking doomsday predictions out of the equation is necessarily a good thing. I think a little bit of it is okay. I don't think it needs to be a preoccupation in terms of what needs to get done. But understanding the impact of having critical infrastructure get shut down should not be lost on anyone. But in the case of the CISOs, and I think Ed really hit some really interesting points here, is that I think that needs to be more of a quarterbacking from the CISO standpoint. Okay, you have a lot of different organizations. You've got traditional IT, you got traditional operations, plant managers, and chief operating officers. And when you get to the very top in the boardroom level, you need to have someone who's going to have to quarterback all this and take control across these domains, because these are still very stovepiped from what I've seen. And that when you look at implementation of some of these standards like ISO 95 and others, I think that the reality is it's got to be something that's driven from the top down. And if it's always going to be on the CEO or the board level to push these things from implementation and overall risk profile, I think it still leaves a lot of gaps. So I'd love to see the CISOs kind of step aside from some of the common conflicts that happen at that level, and really just say, look, we got to come together. I've seen a couple of CISOs do exactly that, and it's not necessarily an easy process, but they do it. And I think they do it because they're seeing these things as no longer being separate entities, right? Completely segregated from one another. These are integrated operations, and one goes across to the other one, vice versa.
I mean, I think you make a lot of really great points, and I think it is an interesting question of at what level of doomsday or what level of scrutiny needs to be given to OT, because as you and I have talked about before, and I'm certain others have talked about, we do have to place some level of remembrance that OT systems really do affect life and limb. I mean, these are, unlike your IT systems where, okay, maybe somebody doesn't get paid. Now you're talking about, hospital systems that run surgery rooms, and you're talking about, the systems that determine whether or not the right amount of power goes to and from your house. And, now you are talking about life and limb. And it is important that, yes, there shouldn't be an overwhelming sense of doom and gloom, but there needs to be a proper appreciation for the severity of things.
Yeah, agreed. Just on that note there, Dustin, I don't know if this is still part of the Spy Museum, but for those who've been to the Spy Museum in Washington, D.C., at the very end of the museum is like a little hallway, little room, and it actually demonstrates what would happen if we lost our critical infrastructure from electricity, water, power, all that kind of stuff through. And it's actually fairly disturbing when you see the progression of what happens when you lose that critical infrastructure. Again, it's not something that should preoccupy, to your point earlier, Dustin, shouldn't preoccupy our minds, but we do need to keep it front and center as to when we look at solutions and approaches to solving this problem.
I will definitely say, having lived in Texas now for a number of years, I think most of us have a proper appreciation for what happens when OT technology does not work the way you want it to in February when it's 7 degrees outside. So yeah, certainly an important thing, certainly an important concept. So, moving on, one of the things that I know, Jeff, you and I talked about in kind of the preparation of this was the importance of, talking about making sure that you're connecting or converging or keeping an eye on both systems as much as possible. So I think I'll start with you, but, what do you see as the potential benefits of connecting and converging OT and IT networks, and how can this be done by CISOs in a way that's secure without compromising critical systems? Because IT side, your cybersecurity operations center might need to be able to see what's going on in the OT environment so that they can, help prevent attacks from taking place. But at the same time, now that you've connected the two networks together, you're now opening up your opportunity that if the IT side gets compromised, the OT side gets compromised, and vice versa. So, what do you see as kind of the benefits, and how is it best done from a practical standpoint?
Yeah, no, it's it's a very interesting situation we're facing right now, because traditionally it has not been that way. OT and IT have been very segregated, very isolated from one another for obvious reasons. But when you look at bringing them together, I think that there are several benefits. One is that you get scale, you get the ability to leverage a smaller set of tools across both domains, across both OT and IT. And so you have cost savings with that, but also to just operational savings. The amount of training that's needed from a staff standpoint goes way down when you look at an integrated tool set that can bridge across both. So when you look at operational efficiencies, being able to take the machinery that's down on the plant floor, looking at what is the mean time between failure, what's overall utilization rate, and being able to put that into an ERP system, for example, financial reporting, looking at managing your uptime, which is more of a C-level type of conversation. You want to have that information flow, from an OT into an IT environment. Now, there have to be, of course, certain considerations placed from a security standpoint, because you don't want to have things, start to corrupt should there be a breach from one to the other. You don't want to have, a PLC, for example, that's been compromised, all of a sudden being able to access a financial server on the IT side of the house. Those are things that would concern anybody in any kind of deployment. But you can put things in place like data diodes, for example, if there's one way, flow of information. You can look at things like segmentation plans that keep things, should there be a breach, it doesn't propagate on a very flat network horizontally. So there are ways to prevent things from, should they be breached, from compromising systems that are really, really critical. But to ignore the benefits of what you can get from an OT and IT converged environment, I think would be a mistake, because I think that the benefits are there. I'll attest that even people who think that their OT network is completely segregated and air gapped and stovepipe just doesn't exist. People walk onto a plant floor, and I'm sure Ed and Jerry can confirm this. They walk in and they plug in their devices, their laptops, and even if you look at internet workstations and HMI consoles, these are things where people integrate in pretty quickly and they want to get information. So that's already happening, whether they think it's happening or not. I think that we need to just accept the fact that OT is no longer a pure environment. It's now a converged environment and will be going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. Well, I'm fortunate is it looks like Daryl was able to join us. So I want to turn the question to him. And I want to also give him an opportunity to introduce himself. But Daryl, the question that to address really is, to Jeff's point, the concept that your IT and OT networks are completely and separately independent may largely not be accurate. So the question is, what can CISOs do to ensure that they can have these two networks connected and working together securely while also not compromising the criticality and the integrity of the OT network?
All right, thanks. Yeah, thanks for letting me join here. Control system with the Department of Defense for about 10 years and recently joined the Department of the Air Force.
You're breaking up a little bit on us. You're breaking up a little bit on us, but let's.
How about now? Is that?
There we go. Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, sure. And been focused on the Air Force and Space Force, their infrastructure, their whole OT, all their environments. And a couple of key things that really come to mind as they were kind of mentioned in the beginning is understanding the dependencies, because we still have a lot of people who don't understand how the OTs support the mission or even support some of the IT. And this is where the CISOs are really starting to learn within the department about these dependencies. And then from there, we update policy now. Things that's in a policy statement.
Yeah, we're still.
So
yeah, we're having a little bit of trouble, but yeah, I mean, I think. Hello? Oh, yeah. Sorry. Jerry, what are your thoughts? What are your thoughts in terms of? I'm sorry, Jerry. What are your thoughts in terms of how can CISOs ensure that they're integrating the two systems appropriately without over integrating them and basically affecting the integrity of the OT network?
Yeah. So let's go back at the very top of that and talk about a little bit of the potential benefits. I saw in the environment, particularly in the utility environment that I was in, I had responsibility for the cyber aspects of these facilities and the controls and for the services for utility or for electric and gas. I had a nuclear power plant that I was responsible for as well. And one of the things that I would tell folks, number one, the potential benefits is that what I was trying to set up was a common operating picture, right? Military term that's out there, but I wanted to be able to see everything at every level and all of my stakeholders on down to the staff to be able to see what was taking place in these environments at any point in time. So I saw that as the potential benefits. When we talk about the connecting and convergent OT and IT, I would posit that there are some hardcore OT people out there who will fall on their sword and say this shall never happen, right? But the fact remains is whether it is by advances in technology and the digitization of OT environments or just by the day-to-day operations where someone comes in and bridges your OT environment into your IT environment, convergence is happening, right? Whether you kind of like it or not. So I think one of the best ways to ensure that this integration is done, if it's done purposefully and intentionally, that CISOs, number one, not go it alone, right? You don't want to go in there and go it alone. You want to get together. We talked about this at the beginning. You want to get together with your engineering staff, the folks out in the field, the engineering staff. You want to get with your IT, your infrastructure teams, and bring all those individuals together and look at the architecture, look at the technology, understand what the objectives are, and understand what the impacts are for doing something wrong. I think one of the things that always needs to be in the front of everyone's mind when you're talking about converging OT and IT environments, particularly in real critical infrastructure, life-sustaining environments, again, I'll use the examples of, say, like utilities, is that the number one focus is on safety, right? The number one focus is on safety. And so you want to make sure that to have a good, secure environment without compromising the safety aspects, you need to have those engineers, the IT infrastructure folks, all together in a room, in a pod, designing this environment, working with the manufacturers as well of, as we digitize this technology, working with everyone together in a team environment to ensure that that convergence doesn't disrupt service or cause some harm to the organization or to a human being.
Thank you. Ed, any additional thoughts that you've got?
Yeah, Jerry, you mentioned about the engineering staff falling on a sword, saying, we don't want to be part of the IT network, and it's funny because these engineers who are part of the production network, who probably have Wi-Fi running on their laptops so that they can walk around the plant, they take that laptop, plug it right into one of their OT devices so that they can make a configuration change. They just bridged the environment. They just made that OT piece of technology publicly available in the IT network, and they're so I can appreciate their desire to want to protect the OT infrastructure with their last dying breath. And one of the things that I've found is there's often a little bit of a struggle for IT or for engineering to want to work with IT. Now, IT's, we want to work with one of everybody, but engineering's like going, yeah, we don't want you patching our environment. Honestly, brother, I don't want to patch your environment either. I want you to patch your environment, but I want you to be informed. I want you to understand the risk that we're seeing that sits simply outside of that, that private OT network that you've provided care and feeding for so many years successfully, and I appreciate the value of what you bring to the table. But let me share some value for you. I've got threat intelligence that you probably just don't see. You might not know that Siemens PLC controller is vulnerable, and there are known exploits, and there are bad actors simply who just want to come in and wreck your world. Let me be a partner to you. Let me share some information with you, and have to build that trust. And I find that's probably my biggest gap of whether or not we connect a private network inside to a production network. And my biggest challenge is the engineering teams to say, well, we've built this pristine operating environment. Nothing's in, nothing's out, and something's in and something's out every time you hook up to a PLC and issue some changes, because you've just bridged the environment at that point. And so it becomes about the partnership, to understand I'm not here to change your world. I am here to provide you with some valuable intelligence that can help you protect your assets better than you've considered before in the past.
Well, yeah, and having been a SOC analyst myself, certainly, we're doing threat intelligence on a regular basis, and that's, if we're doing that, if we're seeing these alerts, we might be seeing something that the OT network's never going to see, like somebody knocking at the door and saying, hey, so and so's trying to get in. Maybe you want to look at, trying to see if you can plug the hole, or make sure that the hole that they're trying to come in is actually right, that door's closed and locked. So yeah, I mean, there has to be a partnership. So
Yeah, and
So
one of the
moving on,
things, let me
yeah,
just tack on
yeah.
one more item on there. So one of the unique things about equipment, especially equipment that has logging capabilities, that's how it speaks to the engineer. It's how it speaks to the end user. And if you're not paying attention to the logs that are being generated in your IT network or your OT network, it could be telling you that it's in real trouble and you not know.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Um, Jeff, let's start with you. In what you and Claroty are doing, what are the key challenges that you're finding asset owners, OT security architects, CISOs are facing when they're looking at securing and converging their networks? And kind of a follow on is, what are the ways that you've found that CISOs can help address these challenges?
Yeah, no. So the challenges that we see in the industry right now is really from a visibility, and I don't mean asset visibility. That is an issue, so I'm not going to dismiss that one. That's still an ongoing problem. But the visibility as to what the overall profile, threat profile of the devices, both the IT and OT, look like, and how do they address them? I think that when you look at opening up the world of OT and converging with IT and really working at this as a unified whole, it doesn't just double the amount of workload. It's actually order of magnitude more than that, because you have different domains and different levels of expertise. I know Ed and Jerry addressed this earlier, where you've got operational technologies don't necessarily comport to what IT terminologies are and vice versa. So now you got to look at this as a broader issue from what do you do and how do you address this? And I think that it requires unique skill sets at the CISO level, and I think having the right staff, qualifications and people with the right backgrounds, handle these things and be able to work them on through. So those are the challenges in terms of being able to open up both pipes. You can't bring it all into one domain. That's actually, that technology exists today. But I guess the question is, what do you do with it after that? How do you address these things, and what skill sets do you bring in from the CISO staff, whether it be a SOC team or it'll be someone at the engineering level for operational technologies to fix these things. I've had customers in the past tell me, like, look, don't tell me all the problems I've got in my system. I know. I mean, I guess you are telling me the ones that I wasn't aware of, but it's just more problems for me to go address. Help me remediate what you know. All right. And I think that this is always the trickiest part, is how do you remediate these issues? And I think that the more tool sets can automate this on the OT and IT side together, they can provide the level of remediation that's needed, or greatly streamline the process so you don't have a 1,000 vulnerabilities popping up every hour that you got to go fix. It's like, okay, which of these vulnerabilities am I seeing are the most important ones? Pick out the top 10, maybe it's top 15. Get this process down to something that's manageable. Because I know that vulnerability teams and SOC teams, they lose their minds when they see everything light up on a SIM screen with all the things that are happening in their system, and they have no way to go address it. Which ones are more important? So I think when you look at this converged environment, there has to be a methodology, whether it be in the tool set or the frameworks that are being applied, that say, look, these are the ones that are most important, because we know these are going to affect critical systems, more so than others. These are the ones you need to focus on remediating ASAP. Other ones can kind of, yes, as you get more time to it, you can address those. So being able to triage the alerts and the vulnerabilities that you see in when you open up both avenues in one console, one environment, needs to be in place, because otherwise it would just become complete pandemonium, and everyone will lose they'll lose the plot. They'll lose the plot as to what actually is going on. So I think that CISOs can look at the right tool sets to make these things happen, the right framework, but more importantly, the right staff to actually go address these things on both sides.
Thank you. Daryl, what do you see as the kind of key challenges, and what are the best ways that CISOs can address?
Yeah, so again, working with the system owners and operators, we hear all the time, hey, Daryl, this is not really a problem, because if it was really important, we would have been hacked already. Or I can simply just throw it into manual mode and no one can touch this. And, they may be right on certain situations and they may not be in others. So, being able to have those system owners and operators understand how they connect to the broader mission perspective, and then from a security perspective, working together on what is the best way to fix it. Now, if it is, we just have a a digital diesel generator and we're fine, then, and everyone's agreed to that. But what we continue to find is we're not all in the same page on what we think is in certain aspects of connectivity or visibility. So yeah, echo with both Ed, Jeff, and Jerry on what they have said earlier, and getting everyone together and focusing on it. And what I wanted to mention just earlier was also we are trying to write into policy that the CISOs have certain authorities over these systems that they just have not in these type of environments, and that's been critically important. And then rehearsing what happens if there is an incident. Those worlds have typically been completely separated, but now trying to bring them together during an incident response and rehearsal tabletop exercise.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, we're coming up on our time. I want to make sure we have time for questions, so we're going to move on to the next question. We hear a lot about the need for really good communication, and that the challenge that CISOs sometimes face is that they're not able to kind of get other people to get the other people to hear what they're saying. There's communication challenges. So Ed, what have you found to be the most effective ways that CISOs can communicate the importance of OT security? To Jeff and Daryl's point, it hasn't happened yet, so until it happens, we're not going to deal with it. Fighting that, how do you communicate the importance of it without hitting the doomsday button of the world is going to come to a crashing halt if we don't address this and if OT gets hit?
Yeah, and so let me start with a critical skill that a CISO needs. The skill is they need to be able to speak the language of business. Keep in mind, your top executives, they're not going to understand the risk posture assessments and OT language and engineering terms and IT terms. They understand business, and so as a cyber professional, I need to speak many languages. I need to understand the engineer and the infrastructure person, and I need to understand the language of vulnerabilities, and I need to understand the language of business, because I have to translate that up to the language that the senior executives understand. And so for me, one of the ways that I found to communicate the easiest is to tie the risk associated with an entity to a revenue stream. If you say, listen, we've got to go fix energy grid in sector 11 because it affects a large population, they don't understand that. If you explain to them that if we don't put proper controls and do proper risk assessment, that going down is going to drop your revenue by 23% next quarter. Oh, wait a second, that's something I really understand. And so I don't want it to make it sound that my senior executives are ignorant. It's not their forte. Cyber's not their strong suit. What it is my job is to bring to them and translate into their language things that affect the business or the operation of the environment. And so again, for me, it being in the private sector, it's tying that risk of an OT event occurring to a revenue stream and how that affects our business for continuation purposes, I found to be my greatest asset.
Jerry, how about you? What have you found to be the most effective ways to communicate?
Ed stole my thunder. He said it so eloquently as well. And I would just echo what he said, is that CISOs definitely need to understand and learn the language of risk. I call it being multilingual, right? In organization, you have to learn to be multilingual. CEOs, CFOs, chief operating officers, they don't run systems and servers. They don't turn knobs. They're not deploying PLCs to the field. But what they do understand more than anything is they understand business and they understand risk to the business. So if you can articulate what CISOs need to do is articulate the risk to the business, right? So, in organizations and environments that I've worked in, the CEO is looking at tens of risk, all sorts of risk. And if you want to get their attention, you have to get the things that are important to you, these OT issues. You have to get into that risk registry, right? You have to talk to them from a risk standpoint, how it's going to impact the business. And that's the same with anywhere inside an organization. Give a quick example. When I worked in the space community, I worked at NASA, and I was trying to weave cybersecurity into the mission space. It was incredibly difficult but I learned the language. I learned the language of the folks on the engineering side. I learned about launch systems and launch platforms, the spacecrafts themselves, the payloads, how that all comes together, and what the risks were. And once I learned to talk to them in their vernacular, in their language, they got it, they understood, and we were able to move forward. So learn the language of business. It'll take you where you want to go.
Yeah.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry. I think one of those things these days, I think the post-COVID era, we've all become attuned to having that issue. So I want to shift to some of the questions that have come from the audience, understanding that we have about 10 minutes left. This question is actually really good. Most OT devices use different types of microcontrollers, and most of them use their own operating systems. So do you know of, is NIST or Jerry, is CISO looking at doing any sort of research on standardizing these technologies, creating mandates to help reduce vulnerabilities? Organizations are dealing with, different diverse types from, closed circuit television, access control. They're conducting or connecting with the IT, and how do you handle or is there work being done on creating good standards and guidance on how to handle the vulnerabilities?
Yeah, I know you threw that out to me, Dustin. I'm thinking maybe Jeffrey might be a little bit more depth in this area. As far as CISO, the work that I'm doing with CISO, we're not looking at that area right now in particular. I do believe that NIST has some publications out in the OT environment, but I don't know anything about yet about standardization in that area. Again, I will punt and ask maybe Jeffrey or Ed may know something in that area.
Jeff, do
Yeah.
you have any thoughts?
I do. Yeah. So I think that CISA, in terms of a standard approach with operating systems, it's a noble thought. I think it would be difficult to implement, and the reason why is that the operational systems out there have been deployed for a long time, and every standard that's out there is proprietary. Obviously, standards proprietary, conflicting terms. But you look at what Rockwell does and what Siemens does. I mean, they all have their own proprietary protocols and their approaches and operating systems. And with that large deployed base, I think that the cost to go back and enforce a standard operating system on those systems would be really prohibitive. I think that it would be a difficult prospect for anyone to undertake, as noble as it may be. I think a better approach would be looking at what's already out there, and with a continually adoptive, architecture of being able to take those different protocols, those different operating systems into account, and be able to basically bridge them together, to basically amalgamate what's happening in the environments and have a common operating picture based on all the different things happening out there. It's a daunting task, right? But I think that that's a better way, and probably a more efficient way and a quicker way to implement better security controls than to go and retrofit a different operating system that a lot of proprietary manufacturers probably will not want to do anyway.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just interject really quick, Dustin.
Absolutely, yes.
On that, one, I would say that, I'm definitely not representing CISA here. I'm a board member, but I'm not representing CISA. But I can envision a time where the current administration and CISA pushes into these device manufacturers environments the concept of secure by design. right? So regardless of what your operating system is, it's proprietary. I think the notion and the idea of secure by design and following sort of those tenets is something I can see taking place in the very near future.
Thank you. So, lightning round. In closing, what is probably the most important lesson or takeaway you want to be sure that attendees leave with from today's briefing? We'll start with Ed.
I'm gonna simplify this down and say, as a CISO, if you in your mind consider OT your child, you would never send your child to the bus stop without a jacket and checking the weather first. Understand their growth is not at the level and pace as IT. Treat them with kid gloves and go in on their side and create a valuable relationship with them where you're bringing value to their world, and you will probably find that you're going to fare better in reducing risk across your organization.
Daryl, one most important lesson or takeaway you think attendees should have?
Right. So, both sides of this, the good people and the bad people, their objective is to not be detected in any of these type of networks. So know that the adversaries are going to be grabbing and going or hiding in these OT networks. So you almost have to prove that it's not happened. Really need to direct a couple of audits and continue to rehearse IT and OT incident response together. Sports analogies don't always work, but if you had access to to the other team's offensive plays, would you make it obvious that you had it, right? So I think that there's always this expectation that I need to have evidence that something bad has happened. So I think just speak in terms of, what if they had it and you didn't know, what might be some ways to prove otherwise? Thanks.
Thanks, Daryl. Jerry, your last thought.
Yeah, just a couple of things that I said at the very beginning. Number one, CISOs, get smart on OT, right? Educate yourselves. Don't go into it blindly. Just because you've been in IT security or, in the IT environment for the last 20 years, it's different. And there's something very special. Number two, build an environment, a consortium with your peers on the OT side of the house, those engineers and also the folks in infrastructure. On IT infrastructure side, the architects, build a consortium and work through the problem together. It would take you, it will take you a very, very long way if you just do kind of those two simple things.
Awesome. Jeff, we'll give you the last panelist word.
Yeah, always a scary concept to give me the last word, but yeah, thanks, Dustin. I would say that I know that OT is a challenging space. There's a lot out there. There are a lot of deployed technologies. It's complex, but embrace the right approach. Embrace the right platforms, the right frameworks, the right methodology at the CISO level, and things will be fine. I think that the doomsday approach is something that is not very helpful in the long run. It needs to be something where we consider the risk in terms of a downtime in such critical infrastructure. So not to downplay that part of it when you think about that. But in the case of embracing this and making this your own and being able to have the right methodologies and tool sets and platforms to make it secure, that is here today. The other part is, and the last point I want to leave is that the IT and OT convergence, it's here today, right? So that genie is out of the bottle. It's not going back in. So I think the sooner that manufacturing concerns and critical infrastructure providers understand that and embrace that with the right approach, the better off we're all going to be.
Thanks. This has been a really great conversation, certainly about a topic that probably doesn't get as much attention as it should. As I think we've all said, OT is certainly super important. Heather, you want to just say something real quick? I know we're got about a minute left, but anything you want to share?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for attending our webinar today. I'm Heather Young. I am the Vice President of Public Sector here at Claroty. We're an organization that's really focused on educating not only the public sector, but really the world about industrial control system, IoT security, and we believe that this topic is very relevant, and we want to be helpful and meaningful in how we educate the community. So as a member of ICIT, we'll be contributing not only our thought leadership and our expertise, but also the data. We have a team of researchers who research these types of vulnerabilities. So we're happy to be able to partner with ICIT to help the world when it comes to these types of threats and help educate CISOs and directors. If you have any questions, please reach out to ICIT. We'd be happy to help. And we are holding an industry conference that is a non-commercial conference to bring together members and leadership for ICIT called Nexus. If that's something that interests you, please reach out to ICIT or to us directly, and we'd be happy to nominate you as an attendee for that conference. So really appreciate your time again today. Thank you, ICIT and our esteemed panelists. Really appreciate all of the knowledge you have shared with us today.
Absolutely. And again, I want to thank our panelists, Jerry, Ed, Jeff, Daryl. Thank you, Claroty, for sponsoring today's event and partnering with us on today's briefing. Of course, thank you to everyone for joining. We encourage you to visit us at ICIT, ICItech.org. That's ICITECH.org to access more of our free research and education. And we'll see you at our next ICIT briefing. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.